By the time I noticed a moving truck outside my house that evening, I finally understood why my daughter-in-law, Natalie, had called me at 6 a.m. with urgency. Gwen, please don't go home today. At 65, I've learned that concern sounds different from fear. Natalie was clearly afraid. If you come home early, she said quietly, they'll finish before you arrive. Then the line went silent. I stood in my Tacoma kitchen, the steady hum of the refrigerator suddenly overwhelming. My thoughts went back to my birthday dinner the previous night. My son, Logan, had shown unusual interest in my late husband's inheritance while we were having cake. He asked direct questions. Was the house placed in a trust? How was the estate arranged? I had already taken precautions. Years in accounting taught me to recognize risks before they become problems. That evening, I went to my office and signed the revocable living trust documents. My attorney, Martin, had prepared everything. I left the folder on my desk for electronic filing, assuming it was simply routine organization. But later, I found Logan standing near my purse, claiming he was looking for aspirin. Natalie had looked extremely pale for the rest of the evening. I went to work the next day as usual, but it no longer felt normal. Natalie wasn't warning me about a disagreement. She was warning me about something more serious. By the time I turned onto my street that afternoon, the assessment of my life had already started. The birthday dinner itself had seemed ordinary at first, though louder than I prefer. Logan had invited several guests I didn't know well. A couple from the neighborhood attended, along with two men from his company. One of them was introduced as a business associate named Curtis Vale. I shook his hand briefly and didn't think much of it afterward. Logan kept everyone engaged, pouring wine and guiding the conversation. But after some time, I began noticing the pattern in his questions. "How complicated is Dad's estate paperwork now?" he asked casually while passing a dish. I answered that everything was organized and that Martin had helped me. Later, he leaned back and asked if I had moved the investment accounts into a trust. I said I had been reviewing that option and left it at that. Natalie sat across from me, barely eating. She kept looking toward Logan and then back down at her plate. I thought she looked tired, though I didn't question her at the time. Near the end of dinner, Logan asked more directly, "You still keep the property documents in the office safe, right?" I nodded without adding details. That's when I quietly excused myself and walked down the hallway to my office. The folder Martin Keller had prepared weeks earlier was on the desk. I reviewed the final pages again, which felt appropriate even though I trusted his work. Then I signed. The house title, brokerage accounts, and the inheritance from my husband were now secured under the trust. Martin planned to file everything electronically that same night. When I returned to the living room, Logan was standing near the coffee table with my purse open. He straightened quickly. "Just looking for aspirin," he said. I acknowledged it and sat down again. I didn't confront him in front of guests, but the moment stayed with me longer than I expected. The conversation continued, though the atmosphere had changed slightly. I also noticed Natalie watching Logan more closely after that. Looking back, the issues with Logan's business had been developing for months. At the time, I only noticed small details and told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. Logan managed a logistics company near Tacoma's port area. For years, everything seemed stable. He often talked about new shipping routes, warehouse contracts, and expansion plans with confidence. Over time, that tone shifted. He started canceling Sunday dinners more frequently. When I asked, he dismissed it as being busy. He once told me, "Growth always looks messy." One evening, while helping clear the table, Natalie mentioned delays in payroll. "It's temporary," she added quickly, as if correcting herself. I didn't press further, though the explanation didn't feel complete. A few weeks later, I overheard Logan speaking outside my house after a family dinner. His voice was low but tense. "I told you the payment is coming," he said into the phone. "You're not the only creditor." He ended the call quickly when he noticed me near the doorway. Later that night, Natalie stayed behind in the kitchen while Logan went upstairs. "His loans are becoming complicated," she told me quietly. I asked Logan about it later. "It's normal business financing," he replied. "Nothing you need to worry about." I let the matter go. Over time, parents learn that pushing too much often closes conversations rather than opening them. What I didn't fully understand then was how serious the situation had become. Logan had expanded his company quickly, using borrowed funds to finance trucks and warehouse space. When several shipping contracts failed, the debt remained. It had grown beyond $1.2 million in commercial loans, along with personal guarantees that made Logan directly responsible. Suppliers were starting to demand payment, and the bank had issued a notice requiring additional collateral within 48 hours. At the time of my birthday dinner, I didn't know the exact figures, but I could sense the pressure surrounding Logan, even if he avoided explaining it clearly. That pressure also explained why my home, which I had lived in for decades, had suddenly become so important to him. After Natalie's call, I followed my usual routine and went to work. It helped keep me steady, but the conversation stayed in my mind. Around 9 a.m., I contacted my attorney, Martin Keller. He has managed my legal matters for years. He speaks carefully and avoids rushing to conclusions, which is why I rely on him. I received an unusual call from Natalie this morning, I explained. She told me not to come home today. Martin didn't respond right away. Instead, he asked a few practical questions about the trust documents I had signed the previous night. Everything had been filed electronically, he confirmed, before adding, "Let me verify something." I could hear him typing as we stayed on the call. After a moment, his tone became more focused. Someone had attempted to access the title history of my property late the previous night. I asked how. He explained it was done through the county system, and the request came from an internet address registered to my home. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the office wall. I hadn't used a computer after the dinner. "That wasn't me," I said. "I didn't think it was," Martin replied while continuing to review the records. Then he added that there was another entry, a mobile notary appointment scheduled for that morning under my name and home address. I exhaled slowly. I didn't schedule anything. "I know," Martin said calmly, "which means someone else did." After a brief pause, he gave a clear instruction. If anyone asked me to sign documents that day, I should not do so until he reviewed them. I agreed, although by midday I had already decided to return home and see the situation myself. Natalie's voice stayed in my mind, steady but urgent. It became clear she had not been warning me about a simple disagreement, but about something already underway. I left work earlier than usual that afternoon, telling my manager I had a personal matter to handle. The drive home felt longer than usual, largely because I kept thinking about the call and Martin's warning. When I turned onto my street, I slowed down. A moving truck was parked directly in front of my house, and two men were carrying boxes inside, with the efficiency of people completing a routine job. I parked near the end of the block and observed for a moment before stepping out. Logan stood on the porch giving instructions. He told the movers to start with the artwork in the hallway and the silver in the dining room, then move the safe from the office using a dolly. It was clear he wasn't organizing documents. He was clearing out the house before any financial restrictions could be enforced. I stayed where I was briefly and called Martin. I told him I was outside and described the situation. He didn't sound surprised. He said he was already on his way and reminded me again not to sign anything and, if possible, not to handle the situation alone. I ended the call and walked toward the house. As I approached, I heard Logan speaking inside. He was telling someone that I had signed the papers the night before and that they were just organizing things. When I entered through the front door, the movers stopped immediately. One placed a box on the floor and looked toward Logan. Logan turned slowly. For a moment, we said nothing. His expression shifted from surprise to a more controlled look. "Mom," he said, attempting a calm tone, "you're home earlier than expected." I glanced toward the hallway leading to my office. The door was open and several file boxes had already been placed nearby. "I finished work early," I replied. Logan folded his arms lightly, acting as if everything was normal. He said they were reorganizing and that there was a lot of paperwork. The movers watched both of us carefully, as people in that position often recognize when a job is not what it was described to be. It was clear Logan had expected me to return much later and had already explained the situation to others as if I had agreed to it. He repeated that they were simply organizing and gestured toward the boxes. I stepped further into the living room, Several boxes were stacked near the hallway, and the office safe was partially visible behind the desk. Reorganizing? I repeated calmly. Logan moved to the dining table and picked up a folder, saying he had planned to discuss it with me that evening. He slid the documents toward me. I remained standing and looked at the top page. It was a power of attorney, followed by forms authorizing Logan to manage my financial accounts and property decisions. A woman standing near the window stepped forward and said she was there to witness the signature. I recognized her as Dana, Logan's junior bookkeeper. When Martin asked for her credentials over speakerphone, she didn't attempt to present false identification. Instead, she admitted the situation. "I'm sorry, Gwen," she said quietly. She explained that Logan had told her I had already agreed and that he only needed the stamp for the bank before noon. She said she hadn't realized I was unaware of the arrangement. The atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. Dana tried to recover by suggesting there might have been a clerical error. Martin remained calm and stated clearly that any attempt to execute those documents would constitute fraud. The movers exchanged looks, and one slowly set his box back on the floor. Logan's confidence began to weaken. He said the situation was being exaggerated. I stayed where I was, allowing events to proceed without interruption. Dana picked up her bag and said she needed to check with her office, then left. The movers followed shortly after, leaving the boxes behind. Logan remained across the table, looking at me. He said I didn't understand how serious his situation was, his tone now more direct. I closed the folder. "No," I said quietly. "I think I finally do." After he left, the house became quiet. The boxes remained where they had been placed, giving the entire situation an unfinished feeling. I spent some time returning the files to the office safe, focusing on a practical task. Natalie came back later that evening. She entered slowly and closed the door behind her. Her eyes were red, though she appeared more exhausted than emotional. She said she needed to explain what had happened that morning. I motioned toward the kitchen table, and we sat down. She told me she had found the documents before Logan woke up. They had been in a folder labeled property authorization. I waited while she gathered her thoughts. She looked down at her hands briefly before speaking again. She admitted she knew Logan's business was in trouble, but she didn't realize he intended to involve my house. I asked how long she had known about the debt. "A few months," she answered quietly. "He kept saying it was temporary." She then placed her phone on the table and showed me messages he had sent the previous week. One message read clearly, "Once the house sells, everything resets." Natalie exhaled slowly and explained that Logan had told her the bank only needed collateral and that I would understand once things stabilized. I didn't respond immediately. Sometimes people explain not to seek forgiveness, but because they need someone to hear the truth. "There's something else," Natalie added. She opened a recording file on her phone. She explained that they had argued about the debt weeks earlier, and she had recorded some of those conversations. At the time, she only wanted proof of how serious the situation had become. She looked at me and said she hadn't expected what happened that afternoon, but now those recordings might be important. Logan responded more quickly than I expected. Within a week, Martin informed me that Logan had filed a lawsuit challenging the trust. During our meeting, Martin explained that Logan was claiming I did not fully understand the documents, and his lawyer was suggesting possible cognitive decline. I nodded slowly. The accusation itself was not as surprising as hearing it formally stated. "So the argument is that I'm confused," I said. "Essentially," Martin confirmed. "If the court accepted that claim, the trust could be invalidated." A few days later, we attended the preliminary hearing. Logan sat across the room beside his attorney, avoiding direct eye contact for most of the session, though the tension in his posture was clear. At one point, the judge allowed him to speak. Logan stated carefully that I had been forgetting things recently and that he was concerned I did not fully understand what I had signed. I listened without interrupting. The calm I felt surprised me, though by then the initial shock had passed. Martin leaned slightly toward me as Logan's lawyer continued outlining their argument. He said they had prepared documentation showing my financial decisions over the past year, demonstrating consistency. Natalie sat beside me in the courtroom, her hands tightly folded as she listened to Logan's attorney describe the trust as sudden and questionable. For a moment, the room became very quiet. Legal disputes often appear complex, but they usually come down to something simple: whose version of events is believed. At that point, Logan's version still sounded structured. What the court had not yet heard was the conversation Natalie had recorded. When Natalie was called to testify, the room grew quieter. She walked forward without looking at Logan and paused briefly before speaking. Logan's attorney began with standard questions about the trust and the birthday dinner. Natalie answered calmly, though her voice remained low. She stated that she knew Logan's business had significant debt, but did not know he planned to use my house until the morning she found the documents. Logan interrupted, saying that was not accurate, but the judge raised a hand and told him he would have time to respond later. Martin then stepped forward and submitted an audio file to the court system. He explained that the recording had been provided by Natalie and captured a private conversation between her and Logan from several weeks earlier. The room settled again as the recording began. Logan's voice was clear. He said with irritation that if I refused to sign, they would claim I was losing capacity. After a brief pause, he added that once the house was sold, the bank problem would be resolved. No one moved while the audio played. When it ended, Natalie lowered her eyes, her hands slightly unsteady, though she tried to remain composed. Logan stared ahead without speaking. Martin turned off the playback and waited. The judge leaned back and reviewed his notes, while Logan's attorney had stopped writing entirely. Moments like that do not require raised voices. The facts speak clearly. The explanation Logan had given earlier no longer held the same weight, and it was evident that the recorded conversation made his intentions difficult to defend. Within 3 months, Logan's company collapsed. The bank enforced its loans, and contracts disappeared once the lawsuit became public. Businesses tend to avoid uncertainty, and his partners moved on quickly. Logan eventually sold his own house to cover part of the debt. Natalie filed for divorce soon after. She did not speak negatively about him in court. She only explained what had happened and why she could not continue the marriage. Reactions within the family were divided. Some relatives described me as stubborn, while others said I had acted reasonably. I listened without arguing. People interpret situations differently depending on their perspective. One evening, while sitting in the living room, I received an email from Logan. He wrote that he knew he had made mistakes, but said I did not have to destroy everything. I read the message carefully and closed the laptop without replying. Sometimes distance communicates more than another discussion. Later that night, I thought again about Natalie's call early that morning. At the time, I had only heard the warning. Now I understood the courage behind it. Life has a way of revealing where trust truly lies, and sometimes it comes from the person you least expect. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing your thoughts below. Your perspective may help someone facing a difficult family decision. And if you would like to hear more stories like this, remember to like the video and follow the channel.